Hello, teacher friends. Let's break down student talk time. Today I'm going to talk about some reasons for student talk time, some reasons for teacher talk time, some challenges with student talk time, and maximizing it on platforms such as iTalki, which are one on one. And I'm going to give you some ways that you could promote it, some ways that have worked for me. Awesome. So, just to start off, when I was training to become a teacher, I learned the 70-30 rule. And that rule basically dictates that a teacher should speak 30% of the time and students should speak 70% of the time. This is suggested for a number of reasons, which I'll go into in a minute. Um, but I'm going to talk about why on iTalki things could shape up a little bit differently. So, first of all, what are the reasons for student talk time? First of all, there are more chances for feedback. I mean, honestly, the more that the student speaks, the more opportunities you get to hear potential mistakes, and also potential positive aspects of their language, and to give them constructive feedback. Number two, it limits the teaching time. And this is great. Like, part of learning to be a better teacher is actually, ironically, learning to teach less and getting your students to do the work. And this, in the long run, is going to make them more invested in their learning strategies and development. And it's going to help them take control of their learning journey. And the third reason is, of course, it helps them to practice. It helps them to become more fluent. So those are three solid reasons, and I know that there are more. There are challenges though on different platforms such as iTalki. This is one-on-one, so you don't have the dynamics of other people in the class. 30 students in the class where you could put them in pair work, group work to kind of keep them busy, where they are actually sharing the student talk time overall. In fact, it's basically either you are speaking or they are speaking, and that could be a little bit tricky to get that number all the way up to 70% or more. Shyness filters into this as well. I mean, if you have a shy student in a class, you could pair them up with some of the more outgoing students and you could kind of get an equilibrium going and to balance things out. When it's just you, a teacher, who is hopefully quite at ease, not all the time. Sometimes students are more confident than teachers are on learning platforms. But if you get just a teacher and the student is shy, it could be difficult to get that student to speak 70% of the time, especially before you build rapport with them. And the third thing is the goals of the student. I mean, a lot of students come to me like they go to a doctor's office. They're looking for a diagnosis. They want to know what the challenges are, and they want me to give them detailed explanations and answers on how to improve. Yes, there are a lot of students who come for practice, but they also come for detailed explanations. And the more that they are finding out about their challenges, the better for them. Yeah. So, here are some reasons why we should have teacher talk time. I mean, this should not be just a taboo thing. When I first began teaching, I felt guilty talking. I felt like every second I was talking, I was taking a bit of quality away from the class. I was taking learning opportunities away from the class. That's not necessarily true, and especially not one-on-one conversational lessons on a platform such as iTalki. So first of all, the teacher should speak while giving instructions. So let's just outline when the teacher is going to speak. Giving instructions, you're going to be speaking. Unless if you get the students to read them from a page. When you're modeling an activity. So for any of you who don't know what modeling is, that is when you have an activity you want the student to complete and you give them an example of that activity. So for example, If you want them to create a list of different sea creatures, you could say a shark or a whale or something like that. You're getting the ball rolling. You are modeling what you want them to do. Yeah, so you're kind of showing them how to do the activity, and then you pass the torch to them, you pass them the baton, and they finish it up. Another time is feedback. That's another point that you're going to be speaking, and it's completely fine, and you shouldn't feel guilty. But of course, we want to try to limit this and to eat up only as much time as we really need to. When we introduce the topic, one way of introducing a topic, a good warmer is actually telling a short story from the teacher. Yeah. So introducing the topic, justifying the activities, explaining why you are doing an activity. Because you would be surprised by the amount of students who might not even say it, but once they feel comfortable, they've told me, they've asked me why we are doing certain things. And if you justify it to them, if you explain why we are learning this or why we are practicing this particular aspect of the language, once they get it, it's magic, right? And they feel a lot more engaged and a lot more part of the process. So I've learned to actually beat them to the punch and to justify a lot of activities that, when we say justify, it sounds negative, like you're defending what you're doing, but it's basically just explaining how this will help them, and that also helps them to focus on the element of speech that you want to optimize or improve during this activity. Even if it's just a conversational lesson with no activities, you could explain why we are talking about this topic and why it is important, how you hope it will help them in the real world. And the final one, this is kind of similar. It's outlining criteria. So of course we're going to have to speak when we're explaining what we are going to judge the student on, and what criteria we will use to assess them. Yeah. All right, cool. So these are some ways to promote student talk time on iTalki. You could ask your students to repeat instructions. This really tests their listening skills. A lot of students, like a lot of people, just go, yeah, okay, yeah. And they're not really listening. So if you catch them off guard and you ask them, okay, so what are you doing? You'd be surprised by the amount of information that goes in one ear and out the other. And believe me, you do that one time, you do that 2 times, they will listen from now on. So I really suggest that you get them to repeat instructions. Don't do this every time. This is going to eat up way too much of the class, but it's good to throw that curveball out every once in a while. You could get them to reflect on the activity that they just did, any activity. Ask them how they feel. Ask them, so how'd that go? Sometimes when I'm even doing an IELTS test with my students, we'll get to the end and I'll say, all right, so how do you think that went? You know, they could assess themselves. They could give themselves a self-assessment, and this is contributing to the student talk time. Yeah. This leads into scaffolding. Scaffolding, like modeling, is a common term you'll hear when we're talking about English language teaching or language teaching in general. Basically, scaffolding is when you have a goal or a certain marker that you wish to achieve with the student, and you run certain activities to see how close to that marker they are, how close to that standard they are at the moment, right? And part of this is really building with the student. So for example, if a student is kind of stumbling through a sentence, where they're using new vocabulary that could be quite difficult, helping them through that sentence, giving them not feedback, but giving them words and structures to help them through this activity. This could be a form of scaffolding right here. And you know, if you get your student to have a self-assessment, to conduct that assessment, and you you give your view and your opinion as well. You are scaffolding and you are building towards a collaborative assessment. So basically, working with your student through this self-assessment process and through any processes, this is actually a really good way to justify teacher talk time as well, by scaffolding and building towards the end goal of the expected outcome of an activity is definitely justified. All right, another way to promote student talk time is to get them to explain something. It could be something visual, to explain a picture, to define a term, ask them to tell you a story. Yeah? Storytelling is so important in probably any language. Like, to connect with people, storytelling is incredibly important, and a great number of students struggle with this skill. They struggle with using the past tense, first of all, and all of the different tenses that we use in the past. They struggle with using natural language, idiomatic language, phrasal verbs when they're speaking about the past, because they are focusing so much on grammar, on the pronunciation. So speaking about the past, getting them to tell you a story, even just asking them, how was your week, is really important. And I think that this is probably a pretty general human being thing to do, but when you start a class, try to dig a little bit and try to find out how your student's week was, if they're comfortable talking about that, and if you're comfortable talking about that. And a really good teacher would remember things about their students that they've been told before, and will ask them questions about that. So for example, if your student tells you, I'm going to a birthday party this weekend, next class, ask them how the birthday party went. It might seem difficult to remember that, what all 30 or 40 students are up to, but over time it could really become natural as you improve your rapport with your students. And that leads into my next point: build rapport. Like, if you build rapport with your students, it's amazing. I've gone into classes where I know my student is very, very shy. Like, this is my first class with them. I know they're shy. I know they don't like to talk a lot. And what you do is basically kind of adjust the gears. So for me, I'll be a little bit lighter while I'm speaking. I'll allow more pauses from when they finish speaking to myself speaking. I'll try softly. And the key word is softly and not being aggressive, to find things that they're interested in. And you might have to ask some questions, some general questions to start off with. But that's good. Start with really general questions about where they're from. All of this is rehearsed. Be friendly. Show an interest. Find particular aspects of what they're talking about and ask them about it. So for example, a lot of teachers I've taken classes with on iTalki will ask me about my family, and then they'll just jump to the next thing. They'll ask me about my favorite kind of food. They'll ask me about my favorite film. That's good. You have a good range of topics. But to build rapport with students, I've found that it has been very useful to actually ask about family, and then maybe ask how often they see their family, or where their family lives, for example, where their hometown was, if they like their hometown. It's kind of dig more into these subtopics instead of just going to a bunch of different topics. That can make the conversation feel a little bit superficial and a little bit too English classy, talking about all these things they've spoken about so much. It could help to build rapport and to add more depth to your relationship with the student, from what I've found. But as always, I welcome any viewers to contribute their thoughts in the comment section below, and to let us know if you found anything else that has worked well. with building rapport. All right, just a few more ways to promote student talk time with students. To read aloud, just get them to read out loud. That's practicing their pronunciation. That's practicing their reading to speech, transmitting, right? So that could really be useful. Dictation could be useful, kind of like getting your students to repeat instructions, getting them to read something and explain it. Listen to something, watch a video, and explain it. That's some student talk time right there. The last one would be to prepare a presentation as well. All right, great. Well, I hope that that helps. Of course, student talk time is not the be all and end all. For me, I do not necessarily aim for 70-30 online. As I explained, there's a different dynamic with your students online, and for that reason, I typically, it depends on the student. Some students want to just have a conversation. Why not 50-50 or 40-60? If it's a general English class, especially with a student who needs to work more on their speaking, I'll try to optimize it. Remember that a lot of your students are not just booking classes to speak, but also to listen. And they want to find more information from a native English speaker. They want to learn things from you. So it really depends on your student and their goals in how you judge the student-teacher talk time. Hope that was useful. If you have any comments on this video, please throw them down in the box. I would love to hear about them. And until next time, keep smiling.